human behavior and how it applies to story design. So I think just as a rehash, one of the things that I was considering with Exist is this idea that we have a body swap moment with the demon Bale, which we talked about last week. And so the demon is now inhabiting the body of Raven, the mother character. And then we have the mother character now in the body of the little girl. So the big question I was pondering over this week is what happened to the little girl? And I think that question is something that needed to be answered. Originally, I just had the little girl just sort of, towards the end, whatever happens, the mother leaves the girl's body and the girl just sort of returns to normal. But there's a lot more drama potential if we try to understand what ended up happening to the girl. And it's also a bit of foreshadowing for something I'm going to talk about later today about where I want the story to go. But we can have moments where the mother, inside the body of the child, visits the child's psyche and realizes that the child is still in there but suffering immensely. And to relieve or alleviate the suffering, the little girl has to come back to her own body. But doing that will result in the mother's death, right? So the mother has to find a way, Raven has to find a way to keep inside the girl's body just for a little bit longer. But her conscious choice to do so increases the suffering of the girl. So that, I think, will introduce a really, really interesting moral dilemma and will also have the audience fluctuating in terms of how they view the mother character, whether it's favorably or with disgust or that kind of a thing. So we'll pick it up from there. I think I managed to read the rest of the sort of script that I'd mapped out so far for you guys last week. And it's one thing I want to talk about in terms of the point of process, right? Because a lot of people are very polarized in how they approach stories. Some of them will say, well, you got to outline it. Others will say, well, I don't like outlining. I'll just go right to pages and start writing straight away. I like bouncing back and forth between the two, right? So oftentimes I'll map something out in my Excel planning sheet. Then I'll go right to pages. But as I start writing, I'll allow myself to meander from the outline. And that's, for me, very, very important. Might not be important for everybody, but it allows me to bring in the moment and to understand the creativity of the drama of the moment and let my creative thinking take me down different directions. It oftentimes results in me going back to the outline, which we'll see today, and realize how much of it has changed. So the big dilemma, and where the story is still confusing, right, is this. I haven't made a decision on what I want to do. I have two different scenarios. And I'll drop it with you guys and see what you think. Scenario number one, a little, or vignette number one, a little girl possessed by an adult woman soldier, female soldier, giving orders to a crew of hardened Marines. So that's cool. I like that. Scenario number two, which I don't think I talked about, is this idea of... Well, let me give you a little bit of a preamble. So later on in the story, I came up with this idea that, yes, the mother has to release the girl, right? And she has to find her son because you have an easier time with a corporeal transplant if it's a family member. It's kind of like getting a blood transplant from blood transfusion. That's the word I'm looking. It's like getting a blood transfusion from a close relative, right? There's a stronger possibility that the body will not reject it, right? So she's looking for a son so she can transfer temporarily into her son because she's becoming discorporeal, right? So she's losing cohesion inside this girl. It's just the girl's body is rejecting her spirit, right? So she goes to find the son, and then she transfers over into the psyche of the son. So the second premise that I really like is, what if you had your mom inside your head 24/7? What would you do, right? So I think that concept's really funny, but also chock full of drama because the mother and son are estranged from each other. They haven't talked to each other in 10 years. The son has been living with the dad, and now they're suddenly in the same headspace together, sharing each other's thoughts. So that I thought would be incredibly interesting. The unfortunate thing is, if I don't make a decision, pitching that will be just confusing. So imagine an elevator pitch situation, right? So an executive says, well, what's your story about? And you're like, oh, it's cool. It's about this this demon that possesses this woman, but the woman ends up inside the body of a girl. And then so she, as a little girl, has to lead a team of hardened Marines to kind of get her soul back. But then she runs into her son, and then she transfers into the son, releases the girl, and then it's about what would you do if you had your mother living in your head 24/7. It's just confusing. It's messy. It doesn't make for a nice, clean, solid pitch. So I have to make a choice, right? So a couple of things that I've considered, right? Number one, I think the stronger idea is having your mother inside your head. I think that's a really powerful idea. I don't think the girl, and I've thought about this deeply, I don't think the girl really matters to the story. She's just a device, isn't she? She's just oh, look at that visual, a little girl leading these hardened Marines into battle, right? I don't think that's as emotionally strong, right? You know, unless you get to know the little girl. The little girl would have to factor heavily into the story and become a bit more of an important player than just some random girl that they saved from the ghost of her abusive father. It's not strong enough, right? And here's the reason why it's not strong enough is you got to remember, for 1 season, 2 season, 3 seasons, we're asking the audience to invite these characters into their home. So to do that, the audience needs to feel an emotional connection to the characters, right? And want to be invested in their emotional journey. And this sort of little girl just doesn't feel like part of that, right? Whereas the mother and son definitely do, right? You want to see that mother-son relationship unfold. So I made the first decision to say, well, that's our story. That's our focus, right? It's the mother and the son. Not only do they have to find Bale and get her back into her own body and ultimately defeat the demon and all, stop his evil, nefarious plans, but the emotional story is, can a mother who abandoned her son reestablish that loving relationship after so long, right? So that's the story, that's the heart, the beating heart of this whole idea, right? So the compromise I made is that the mother ending up inside the head of the son will be a surprise at the end of the pilot episode, right? So it'll be a nice little bait and switch. So that way I get to play with this visual of this little girl leading these soldiers, which just be fun to do. But then by the end of the pilot episode, that's done and out the door, right? And so you can have like a false ending, right? So I imagine the big battle happens and, you know, they're in smoky rubble and ruins and they're lying there, and the main character, the kid Mark, he's covered with ash, and he looks over and the little girl sits up and she's back to normal. You know, she says something and, you know, then you know she's back to normal. And then they can't find the mother anywhere, and the kid's desperately looking for his mom, and then he hears that voice, "I'm in here," right? Or something like that, you know, less cheesy. But it would be a nice little holy cow moment. So I want to save that, and I want to play that, right? The hard part about this type of design is that we know the beats of the story that are going on. So for us, it might seem quite complicated, but for an audience who doesn't know where the story is going, and we're peeling back the layers little by little, it might be a really interesting surprise for them. And we don't know. We'll never know unless we try it with a test audience or we try pitching it to somebody who doesn't know the story, right? So that's one of the sort of difficulties of designing stories, especially with surprise endings and twists and things like that, because you never know how it will read to the audience. Right? So that's kind of where we're at. I remember last session we had a wonderful discussion about the world, and I think we've gotten far enough along. There's enough there's enough of a skeleton that we can start layering meat on the bones of that whole demon world and hierarchy and things like that. I think the biggest takeaway for me is the idea that the idea of reverse corruption, that the demons can actually start to become human again, that at some point you start to see the minions as people. And I think that's really, really powerful. And I can tell that that's a good idea, is that's the one that stuck with me through the past week, Whereas other things we might have discussed, I might have forgotten about this or that, but that idea stuck around. So I know it's a good one, right? What do you guys think of that idea? Actually, let me rephrase that. Out of our discussion about the demon world, what is the one element that stuck with you the most? None of it? Dead silence out there.
Well, I kind of find it hard to say because I've had the Google Doc open for the whole week. So every time I open my browser, I see it.
Oh no, that's okay. That's all right. That's fine then. What you can still say what is your favorite bit of the ideas that you developed?
I think the thing about the five elder demons, like the five ones who are above everything.
Right. Right.
And one kind of going rogue, and four of them wanting to get the rogue one back.
Okay. My next suggestion then, if that's the area that you're really passionate about, who are the five elders, and will they represent anything? Right. So you can have personalities for them. You can do the cheesy thing where one's earth, the other's fire, the other's air, something stupid like that. But 5 is a powerful number, right? And we can attach a visual symbolism to it. It could even be 5 emotions, 5 sins. Yeah, it doesn't matter what it is. Hellraiser did the same thing, actually. So Hellraiser, each of the different demons, they had a different pain, So, so those are 2 things that will start to give these elders personality, right? And then there's also an idea of what to call them, right? I was watching, what was his name? He was a concept artist. His name escapes me now. But he was one of the concept designers for the Ridley Scott movie Prometheus? No, what was it? Yeah, it's Prometheus, wasn't it? God, I forget the title of it. The one that has that tie-in to Alien.
Oh, yeah, Prometheus.
Yeah, Prometheus, yeah. So he did the designs for Prometheus. And he did sort of an elder alien. And Ridley Scott wanted to call them deacons. And I thought, holy cow, that's such a good name. It's a good name. You guys know what a deacon is? It's in the Catholic hierarchy of priests. I think the deacon is one above priest and right below bishop, I think. Something like that. But just the fact that it had that religious significance, I thought was really quite cool. So that would be interesting. In fact, talking about this out loud, the 5 elders are demons from hell. Wouldn't it be interesting that if they used angel hierarchy terms? After all, they are fallen angels. So if you gave them, they could even have the biblical names. Like one could be Gabriel, right? That would be interesting there. I love that sense of irony of just having these demons have angelic names. Could be interesting. So anyway, yeah, I think that there's a lot there that you can now grow. Whereas we had nothing there before. It's just like this demon appears on Earth. He comes from some hierarchy in the demon world. We'll figure that out later. Now, you can see why it's okay to put that for later, though, because everything that we came up last session didn't really disturb the story. Didn't make any significant changes to the story. We're just fleshing it out, right? Okay, so the next sort of protocol, usually you'll sit and hammer out a pilot, right, based loosely on an idea, and I have a scene structure of the pilot that we'll take a look at in a second. But nowadays, when you're pitching a TV show, people want to see an episode outline or an episodic outline, and just a blurb for each episode and things like that, and a story Bible and all this other kind of stuff. There's a whole package that generally comes together when you're working on a story. So one of the things I've started adding to my sort of spreadsheet is an episode list. So one of the things about the episode list is that in season 1, from episode 1 to episode, I think it was 22. Oh, I went the full It's not going to be 30 episodes. I think I use the old episodic structure. Like if you see the old television series like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and all that kind of stuff, they usually around 22, 30 episodes, right? So it looks like I broke down season 1. Oh, no. Oh, I didn't. Okay, so I went season 1 to episode 10. That's about right. So what's popular nowadays, especially for things that might have heavy visual effects commitment, you're looking at what are called short runners, 8 episodes, 10 episodes, which you guys have seen already with Game of Thrones. So the final season of Game of Thrones, I think, was 7 or 8 episodes.
I think it was 6.
Was it 6? That quick? In retrospect, I think that was a bit of a mistake. But
I don't know why they decided to do it, because HBO was throwing money at them.
Speed. They needed speed. I guess was also a primary factor because they needed to get it out, right? And it's very effects heavy, and you guys know how long effects take, right? So they probably sat down and did an evaluation, not just of the story, but of how long it was going to put together these effects extravaganza. I mean, you got to think about it. Each of those episodes were a mini feature film in terms of visual effects, right? And I think if they'd even added 2 more episodes, it would have like quadrupled the production time. So I think that was one of the mitigating factors. And yeah, you're right. Yeah, HBO is throwing money at it, but I also understand that there's a tendency for people to think that if they've got a successful property, there's no budget. There still is a budget, you know. They still have to come in at a certain mark because they do projected profits and things like that. And so they're really, really trying to... There's still the drive to make the cheapest possible product at the highest possible commercial return, right? So there's that too. Right, so sometimes it's a commercial decision, sometimes it's a production decision, and what suffers are story decisions, I think, because what ends up happening is when you let's say you have a situation where you map out you map out 12 episodes and somebody says, well, we got to do it in 6. They'll usually call in story specialists, or what do they call it, story doctors, I think, story doctors. Of which Carrie Fisher was one. Something you guys might not know. Did you guys know that Carrie Fisher was a story doctor?
No, I didn't know.
Yeah, she would be called in for a feature film that was struggling, or a TV series that's struggling, and she'd be asked to rewrite certain scenes, right? So there are certain specialists that would come in and do that. So for example, Josh Trank's Fantastic Four was really, really struggling in terms of story. There wasn't any superhero battle either. So they called in a couple of guys who'd worked on the Avengers and a bunch of other stuff to doctor the story, right? In video games, they call them story paramedics, and I like that better because that's pretty much what it is. You're just cutting and sewing and patching together a story to get it functional, just to satisfy timelines and budgets and things like that, right? So, yeah, it seems like story suffers, and I think that Game of Thrones was a little bit of a demonstration of that. Right, there were a lot of key story elements that needed to remain in the series that were suddenly excised, and you felt that it was missing. The audience interprets it this way. They interpret it that people are traveling all over Westeros at lightning speed, which is true. But if the story had been cleverly designed, you could move characters from place to place really, really quickly to get the movie or the television show rather trucking along quickly, and the audience would not have noticed that so and so was traveling from Davos to Westeros in like half a day, you know. So, but because the story was so weak and it was held together tenuously, not weak. I think that's not fair. The story was strong, but the way they chopped it up took away from the story. I think that's the way I'd rather say it, because there were a lot of elements that were working well in the last season of Game of Thrones, and I could see where it may have come from, and I could also see how it evolved to what it eventually became. So it's sort of unfortunate, but if there had been stronger story choices made, or if they'd extended it by a couple of more episodes, I think without significantly changing the story, I think they would have had something pretty powerful and unique. You know, people talk about...
They knew where they wanted it to end up. But
Yes.
They didn't know how to do it in such little time.
Yeah. I reckon they did know how to do it. But what you said at the end is the key point. In that short amount of time, they just didn't know how to execute it in that short amount of time, right? So, for example, contrary to popular opinion out there, I love that Arya Stark flew out of nowhere and killed the Night King. I thought that was great. I thought it was really cool. They didn't build it up enough for me, right? They didn't justify it. They could have easily justified that moment, right? And it would have been wonderful. I don't think it should have been what's his name? The drowned god guy, Theon. I don't think it should have been Theon fighting the Night King when Arya flew out of the darkness like that. I think it should have been Jon Snow, right?
Yeah.
And then it would have been, because everyone's building up to this, the whole thing's building up to this confrontation between the Night King and Jon Snow, right? So that needed to kind of happen. That's the obligatory scene that I was talking about, right? It needed to happen. People have been built up for seasons for this confrontation, and to not have it happen was a bit of a letdown. But then you have Jon Snow losing to the Night King, and then Arya comes out of nowhere and saves him and has her hero moment. And because it's his younger sister and they have a special bond, it just means so much more. And God, that would have been so good, right? And you can tell that they sort of wanted to make up for it by having Jon Snow face off with the dragon. You remember that?
Yeah.
But it wasn't... It didn't even touch the sides. It wasn't nearly as emotionally powerful enough. But, again, I don't think they did it deliberately. I think that's just sort of where they ended up when they were trying to, have all of these story discussions and cut things up to pieces. This is why I wanted to take you guys through this to demonstrate this, right? Because there's lots of people who would look at our ideas and maybe say, well, 5 demons? That's pretty cliche, So you might get that, or you might say, man, they might say it was a really good idea when it was 1 demon, but when they made it 5 demons, they just confused the story, right? So I want you kind of guys to be aware that a lot happens during the evolution of a story, right? And things can get lost, things can get muddled. We can get very, very excited about an idea, but what we need is that objective viewpoint to say, actually, I don't get what's going on, right? So that's kind of, I think to a certain degree, a lot of the writing team maybe on the Game of Thrones series was too close to the story, right? So they in their head, they knew what was going on, but maybe they just couldn't translate it well enough to the screen. Oftentimes too, this is another thing people don't realize, right? So there could be a couple of shots that form the connective tissue between different story elements. Can you imagine what happens if a render farm goes down and that shot doesn't get completed? Or another shot, something happens and it's completely ruined? So then you're in the editing room and you have to piece together the story with the footage that you have and still make it make sense. That happens too, right? So there's lots of stuff that contributes to what could potentially go wrong, right? It's something to keep in mind. I've learned that an entertainment property is a massive balancing act. This is how frightening it is. This is how much of a balancing act it is, right? And not only do you have to get the story right, you got to make sure that it's within budget and within timescales. You got to make sure editorial has enough pieces that they can cut together. They can have all the shots, all the story elements in place, all stringed together quite well with connective tissue, and then your lead actress puts in a very poor performance, and people go, wow, that was cringy. Boom, you've just ruined the whole freaking thing. You've ruined the whole episode. And people are making memes about that one shot where that actor said the thing wrong, right? That's how much of a balancing act. Sorry?
Or leaving a coffee cup on the table.
Yeah, or the coffee cup. Yeah, wasn't that in the final sort of meeting thing? There was a Starbucks cup behind somebody's chair.
In episode 4, and then they did it again with a bottle of water in the last episode.
Oh my God. You know how easily that can happen too? It because a set is this live, big, living place, right? And, you might have 2 continuity people who are, the poor people are running around trying to kind of keep an eye on absolutely everything. Continuity is a nightmare job, by the way. It's a nightmare job because you have to pay attention to everything from dirt under actors' fingernails to like, their hair to coffee cups everywhere, and people generally tend to do that on set sometimes. Depends on the production. Like I've been on some sets where it was like super uber professional, but there's others where people have a bottle of water. They'll look at where the camera's pointing and they'll stick it behind a prop, right? And that kind of thing sort of happens occasionally. So I can see why stuff like that happened, right? That's just human error, right? So yeah. Back to what I was saying. There's a lot of different moving parts in a film, right? So I'm a little bit more forgiving. Not if a property is successful or not. Like I recognize a failure for a failure, right? So the Fantastic Four by Josh Trank, yeah, god awful, right? But I do empathize with the production and I understand where they were coming from and the difficulties they ran into. I still hate the movie, but you know what I mean? I've got more kind of like, okay, I see what you guys were trying to do. Didn't work. And I understand that you probably ran into this and that and this. So yeah, I'm a little bit more sympathetic these days. And you guys will be too, because once you're on the front line, you'll be like, wow, this went wrong and that went wrong. And we had to sort of piece it all together with what we had. Okay, so I'm going to go back through this. And we'll talk a little bit about this. I think probably what I might do is I might duplicate this. So I'll create a copy and move that to the end. Because I want to rework it a bit, right? So initially, there were a couple of different things that I had in mind, right? So for example, I didn't know if the opening scene inside the little girl's bedroom would happen in America. And then we'd follow the characters over to the UK. Now, the reason I did that is because I know a lot about special forces. And I know a lot about Marines. Green Berets I know a lot about. I don't know anything about the SAS. So right away, I'm at a disadvantage in trying to create this particular type of scenario. I don't even know the proper military hierarchy structure in the UK. But then I changed my mind because it's like, just get off your ass and do some research. So that's pretty much what it is. And the other difficulty is the fact that I generally tend to write in an American vernacular, obviously, because I'm from Canada. But again, I have to force myself to find that British voice or the Welsh voice to write from that perspective. And I've done some experiments with dialogue, and I've passed it off to one producer that I'm working with, and she said, yeah, it sounds like a Welsh person. So it's taking a bit of time. But I've been here long enough, I can pick up little snippets in the way people talk and sort of craft it that way, right? So I decided, okay, we'll save this for another episode, right? So the idea, actually, I'll just take this idea out because it doesn't really, it's not even for this property anymore. It's got a completely different vibe, right? And then we got rid of the hallway battle. So a battle in the hallway stuck around from the original opener, right? Because I like the idea of these Marines confined in a thin apartment corridor and having to fight a bunch of demons. And how difficult would that be? And then I saw that. They did it once or twice in Daredevil, I think. But it wasn't a case of seeing it in Daredevil and going, oh, somebody else has done my idea. Damn, I'm going to have to go and rework it. No, for me, it was vindication. I was like, yeah, it works in Daredevil. I want to put it in mine because it works really, really well. I'm just going to do mine a little bit differently, but I want to play with that idea, right? And so then that idea evolved into the swinging bodies hanging in the hallway, right? So the first team comes to the rescue, wind up toy as a detonator. No, I got a different opening shot. I'll just kill all this so I can talk a little bit about this. Okay, so I'll give this as an example just so that we can you can see how this works for me, right? Okay, so the first episode is the one that I started scripting out, right? So the opener, again, is Key rescues little, whoops, crikey. Key rescues little girl from ghost of her abusive dad. Right? The opening shot. Little girl sitting on bed talking about monsters. Right? So that's my opening shot. And I love thinking about the opening shot, right? Because, you know, from an artist point of view, from a concept artist point of view, I love that one image where, you know, people go, wow. There was another opening image that I thought of. There's a concept that I'm sort of mulling over called The Ultimate Weapon. And it's about another little girl who just has these superpowers that start growing exponentially. And she doesn't know what to do with them. And then it's about how the world treats her. But the opening shot of that is she's sitting and reading a little school book on top of the New York Empire State Building with her legs dangling over the edge. And I'm like, wow, that's just a nice visual. Like, I would love to draw that or paint that, right? So if I think of an opening that I would love to just do a digital painting of, then I know I'm onto something pretty strong. So I like this idea of this little girl sitting on a bed talking about monsters, and there's a Marine in the room with her, right? Or a hardened soldier. I'll put that in. Right? So in that opening, I might come down here and start building up the story. So what is the story for the first episode, right? Well, we'll talk a little bit about that because that's not entirely developed. But what is the expectation in that episode that's subverted, right? So the expectation in the episode is that there's a battle with a demon, right? The demon hiding inside the little girl is a surprise, right? So, the demon hiding inside, Raven is the surprise. I think this was from an earlier incarnation where I toyed around with the idea of having the demon jump into the little girl's body. This harkens back to, as a bit of a tangent, this harkens back to an idea I had a long time ago about what I'd like to see in a Terminator sequel, right? So we had the Terminator appear as Arnie. Then we had the Terminator appear as Robert Pattinson, this scrawny, wiry cop guy. But it was such a huge surprise because you have this skinny guy who's the liquid Terminator who can throw big old Arnie around the place. And that was an expectation subverted. And I thought that was really, really cool. And then I knew that they were going to go female after that. But I thought, what if they made the next Terminator a child, right? Because that would be really horrifying, wouldn't it? So, yeah. So, I mean, I took that, recycled it, and put it here, but I didn't like it in the end, right? So we'll kill this. So expectations subverted, right? So the reason why I put that in capital letters is because I'd like to remind myself that I want to take the audience down the rosy path and that at some point push them off of it, right? And then really kind of surprise them. But not for surprise's sake. It all has to tie back to the story, right? It really all has to. So, for example, my surprise that the mother is now suddenly sharing headspace with her son. That's a surprise, but it's part of the story. If you have a surprise that's not part of the story, you have shock value, and that doesn't last very long, right? You guys see the difference with that? Okay, so in the first episode, I need to identify, and let me put this to the top, actually. I need to identify the big problem, right? So it looks like I had an earlier idea. I messed around a lot with where the demon is. So does Mark have the demon inside him? Is Bale using him as a host? Is it inside his dad? Is it inside his mom? Right? So this is part of the experimentation process that I love about outlining, right? Because it frees you up. Frees you up to go, let's explore a few different ideas and find out which one resonates with you, the creator, the most, right? And then that's the one that you generally tend to go with, right? So what is the big problem, right? Raven is trapped inside a little girl. Baal has stolen her body, right? That's the big one, right? And how does our main character, because remember, the story is about Mark, right? How does our main character solve this? I've written here, I might leave that. I've written here, finally overcoming his core wound and saves his mother, right? So, have I talked to you guys about core wound? No. Okay, this is a good opportunity to do this. So, I'll finish off this bit quick and we'll jump over to the character page. So let's finish discussing this. So you can see that I've got a few different notes to myself. But the big thing inside of episode 1 is, what is the big problem and how's it solved? I might add, what is the big series problem? Right? Because the big problem is solved at the end of the pilot, sort of. But what is the big series problem, right? Baal wants to what? Right? Now, this is a problem because it's easy to say Baal wants to take over the earth. Yeah, so does every bad guy ever. Right? But what does Baal really, really want? Right? And this harkens back to what I've talked about in the past about villains, right? And the mistake that a lot of people make in terms of designing villains. Do you know what the primary mistake is with creators creating villain characters? We create them knowing they're villains. We pass judgment on them as bad guys. And therefore they're written as bad guys. A villain doesn't think they're a villain. A villain thinks they're a good guy. They just have different methodology than the good guy. In fact, some of the more powerful villains have the same objective as the hero. They just go about it in an evil fashion. The most telling piece of dialogue was in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Renee Belloc meets Indiana Jones. They're both archaeologists. And Belloc says, "You are like me. It would just take a little push to push you out of the light so you could be more like me." That is a phenomenal villain, right? Not saying that cardboard cutout villains don't have their purpose. So in Raiders of the Lost Ark, we had Tote, the eyeglass wearing Gestapo guy with a burnt sort of thing in his hand, right? So you can have these two-dimensional villains, but the central villain controlling everything, has to be someone that we almost admire, right? And that, to me, I think is important. We as creators, Aaron Sorkin kind of said it in another video that I saw just a few days ago, where he said, as a writer, you have to take your villain character and stand before God and defend him, right? And that's what makes a powerful villain. And he should know what he's talking about. Well, actually, he gives an example. So you guys know A Few Good Men, the film? No, that's okay. You don't have to see it. But do you know the Jack Nicholson scene where he goes, "You want the truth? You can't handle the truth."
Oh yeah.
Yeah, everybody knows that. Do you know why everybody knows that and everybody makes fun of it? Because it was powerful. And why was it powerful? Because Jack Nicholson, in the story, Jack Nicholson contributes to the murder of a soldier and is being put on trial for murder, right? And what Jack Nicholson is basically saying is, you want the truth, you can't handle the truth. And the truth is, when the chips are down, you need men like me on that wall guarding you. You need men like me who will do anything that it takes to keep you safe, right? You need us. We protect you so you can buy your cars and your VCRs and your televisions, right? You don't know what death is. That's the whole speech. Powerful because we in the audience go, he's kind of right. He's kind of right. Like if we want to protect our way of life, we want guys who are really hard, don't we? We want guys who will just not drop in the face of insurmountable odds, will show extreme bravery in the face of fear. We want guys who are toughened, hardened, but it's wrong because he committed murder. It's wrong, right? So that's why people remember that line of dialogue. They remember that character because that character is a villain that we can almost admire. Look at from Die Hard, Hans Gruber. Hans Gruber was, played wonderfully by Alan Rickman, right? Charismatic, intelligent, classically educated, admirable, absolutely no match. Bruce Willis's character as a New York cop, absolutely no match for the intelligence and the charisma of Hans Gruber, right? That's a good villain, right? So that's something to consider. And we go back to this. Bale wants to what? What does our villain want to do? Now, when I came up with this concept, it was just, he's on Earth, he's going to create havoc, he's going to take over, right? But now I have to work on the story. And what work entails is sitting down and going, well, what does he really want? And it's got to be something that we can all relate to. And it's something that we could almost want for Bale, but he's just going about it absolutely the wrong way. Right? So that's something worth thinking about, and it's not something you can solve straight away when you're mapping the story out. Sometimes it reveals itself as you get a little bit further along and you start to unfold pieces of the story. You go, oh, okay, this is what it's really about. This is what Bale's after. So I like to give it a little bit of a little bit of a misdirect. So here's what I originally had, right? So Bale wants to, on the surface, take over a particular corporation. It seems really odd because up until now, everything's been sort of mythically based. It's all been sort of blood and magic and oaths and, very sort of, that mystical undertones. So why does he want to take over a particular corporation? I don't know. I just had this this vision of, from this moment of transference, maybe 10 years later or 5 years later, of seeing Raven at the head of this boardroom saying that she needs to downsize her company. And so the members of the boardroom get up, they go out to the balcony, they pull out automatic weapons, and they start slaughtering everybody in the office floor. I've since seen that done before. What was it? There was a film that had that scenario where an alien creature was let loose inside a boardroom. I can't remember what film it was. It was surprisingly gory for... Shazam. Have you guys seen Shazam? Yeah. So do you guys remember that scene? Where a boardroom was violently ripped apart? It was surprising. Yeah, it was surprising because it was like this sudden shot filled with gore in the middle of what was essentially a PG movie. So it was a bit shocking. But I had that concept. Then I saw Shazam and went, oh, they did it. Okay, well, I still want to do it. Right? So that image has stuck to my head. I don't know if it will last, though. Because it took me a heartbeat to remember that moment. So once you start to forget moments, you realize they weren't really strong to begin with. And probably not the best ideas. That's why I like to let certain ideas percolate for a little bit of time. Because if you let some time go by, like a week, and it's still in your head, it's a good idea. That's a tip, right? Your instinct is telling you, yeah, you really want to do this. All the ideas that you were excited about last week, if you wake up a week later and you can't remember any of them, they probably weren't that good, right? So the slaughter of the people in the corporation has stuck with me, right? And I also think it seems to break with the whole, brimstone and treacle and fire kind of imagery of demons. But if you think about it, a really intelligent demon that enters into our realm and wants to take it over or achieve power somehow, wouldn't they do something like this? Especially if they were disguised as a human? They wouldn't go willy-nilly slaughtering people, especially if they don't have an army behind them, right? So I don't know. I still want to play with this. It's still a huge tone break, though. Can you see that? How it breaks the tone quite a bit? Yeah. So I'm not 100% convinced this is the way to go. But it's something. And it's on my way to figuring out what does Bale really want. Right? So we still haven't answered the question, well, why take over a corporation? What is the big end game? Right? And so, you know, I was never really 100% satisfied with Thanos wanting the Infinity Gauntlet just to be like this supreme being. And it's wonderful because what they touched on in the comic comes out a little bit stronger in the film. Right? So why does Thanos want the Infinity Gauntlet?
Perfectly balanced because he wants to depopulate the people to stop overpopulation.
No, he doesn't want what happened to his home planet to happen to everybody else.
Yeah, you're getting closer. You're getting closer. Here's the big leap, and this is the difficult. I think the comic had a difficult time explaining this, but the movie got closer to explaining it. Didn't fully explain it for me. But Thanos wants the Infinity Gauntlet so he could have his little farm. Right? That's what he wants. He wants his little peaceful farm. Right? And coupled with that, he wants peace in the universe, right? By getting rid of half the population. So everybody's got more space because he wants space. He wants his farm. He doesn't want to be crowded with all kinds of people. Right? So what he wants, he's transferred onto everybody else. Which is what we tend to do. We tend to go, okay, I want a farm. I don't want people crowding my space. I want to be at peace. I want to get rid of all the people around me. In fact, that's probably what everybody wants, isn't it? Everybody wants this. So I'll give it to him. That's why Thanos wants the Infinity Gauntlet, because he wants his farm. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah.
And I'm not wildly interpreting it. It's there. It was there in the comic. He actually says it out loud in the comic. The difficulty, though, with the comic is that they couldn't bridge the gap, right? So when I read the comic, I was like, all-powerful being, right? Kills off half the universe. All he wants is a farm? That's stupid. The movies got closer, right? So we started to see Thanos, you know, in his performance and these emotional moments, talking about all the problems that have afflicted his planet, and so we get a bit of a stronger justification for it, right? Still sort of felt odd at the end, right? But then when Thor kills him, I think Thor kills him on his farm, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So Thor kills him on his farm. We felt it a bit. Didn't you feel a little bit of sympathy for Thanos? A little bit? Not hugely, but, you know, there he is peacefully doing his thing on his farm. And Thor felt like the bad guy there, right?
Poor Thanos was looking for the funding to buy his farm.
But it's hard. It's hard for us to make that connection between somebody so purely evil wanting something so simple and peaceful. But again, the creators are trying to say, look, villains are just like us. They want the same things as us. They're using different means to achieve it. And that's what makes them a villain. And I think that's a really powerful place to start, right? And then we care more about Thanos and his farm than Loki and the Tesseract, right? So that's sort of an important thing to remember, right? So yeah, again, what Bale wants, that's huge. So what is the B story? The B story would be Raven's story, because remember, our main character is Mark, the son, right? And in fact, now that I'm talking this through with you for the second week, I think it may be a mistake to introduce the son so late. I don't know. Something to think about. Because so far it feels like Raven's story, right? And I'm constantly reminding you now that it's Mark's story, and I shouldn't really have to. It should be self-evident. Or maybe we just haven't gotten far enough into Mark's story to kind of sink our teeth into it yet. I don't know. I think the C story is Little Girl Trapped. Because it'd be interesting to kind of see what she goes through, learn more about her, and you know what I mean? It'd be interesting to follow her story, get to know her better, root for her a little bit. If we write it or create it cleverly, we can have the audience almost leaning forward to try to comfort this girl, right? That would be the optimal place to be, right? If we can get the audience to do that, right? So, and this poor girl has been nothing but a victim, right? So, you know, we can have her say lines of dialogue is like, what did I do to deserve all this? And then it's like, bam, oh man, she's so innocent, right? She was cursed with an alcoholic dad that was abusive, and now she's suffering in this dark netherworld, and she doesn't know where she is. And she's starting to question, even more powerful, maybe she blames herself. She's like, did I do something wrong? I must have done something wrong. I didn't mean to. Whatever I did wrong, I didn't mean to. And then you got the audience leaning forward going, no, you didn't do anything wrong. It's just these events are happening to you. And then you got your audience, right? Do you see what I mean?
Did Al just cut out for anyone else?
Oh, did I cut out?
Yeah. You were like, and the audience are going.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
then nothing.
It could be that fast motions and the data, the bit streams having difficulty with it. I just said, it would be more powerful if maybe the girl feels guilty, like she feels like she did something wrong, and she's like, what did I do? I did something wrong? I must have done something wrong. I have to figure out what it is that I did, because bad things only happen to bad people. And the audience is leaning forward going, no, you didn't do anything wrong. It's not your fault, right? And you feel bad, and that's when you got him, right? I'm gonna write that down because I like that. I think that's cool, right? What do you guys think? What if the girl blames herself?
What you say about that? I feel bad.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. Did I do something wrong? Must be my fault. Here's the killer line, because bad things only happen to bad people. I love that line because it's so innocent, right? And we know the truth, but we also recognize that this is what you sometimes teach little kids when they're little, right? And so she's just like, bad things only happen to bad people, right? There's just something about that line really kind of gets me. So hence why I wrote it down. So yeah, so this is, do you see how I'm working this now? So I've got my A story working down one trunk, but I'm thinking about the B story and the C story, because eventually we're going to have to dovetail it. It's going to be like a choreography, right? So you'll follow the rhythm of the A story for a little while, and then suddenly, boom, B story comes in, takes over a little bit, right? So you guys have seen that. I've known writers who are really good at creating A, B, C, and D stories. For me, balancing an A story and B story is hard enough. I don't have the experience to sort of factor in the C story, which is why the little girl will be a nice exercise for me and for you guys as well, because she's trapped in the head. We have the freedom to be able to pick up her story anytime we want and drop it anytime we want, and we won't lose the audience. It's a completely different thing if, say, you had a C story happening in a different town, different village, different couple, right? So bouncing back and forth, you might have the audience go, well, wait, what happened there? What's going on now, right? And you don't want that. But do you guys see how the little girl is a much more convenient C story? Yeah. And she's got a simpler objective too, right? She just wants to understand why all this stuff is happening to her. So we have to watch that, because as we work on the C story, there could be the temptation to overcomplicate it. You want to make the ancillary stories, I don't want to say simple, because they need to be complex and engaging, but there just can't be too much. Does that make sense? There can't be too many objectives in the C story. It's got to be straightforward, I think. Otherwise, you lose the thread of it. The best example is Love Actually, right? So one of the C stories that was happening was, do you remember the two porn stars and they fall in love with each other and it's all innocent and things like that? You guys have seen Love Actually?
No, I haven't.
Everybody in the UK has seen Love Actually. Everybody in the UK.
I haven't been
Okay. All right. Well.
Wait, is that the one with Rowan Atkinson?
there. No.
No. I swear that Rowan Atkinson's in Love Actually.
Oh my God! You haven't seen Love Actually? Holy cow! It's like the Christmas movie.
You have seen a scene of it.
All I know is Andrew Lincoln is in it, and he
No.
Andrew Lincoln. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I swear he's in that scene in the mall or something.
Oh yeah. No. He's in the shop. Yeah. He's a shopkeeper. That's right. You're right.
Oh.
Yep.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Ruben was right.
Yeah.
Yeah, what was that, David? Yeah.
It's
Get down to my level, boy. Get down to my level.
it's kind of an unfair comparison because it's something called a multi-protagonist story. So a multi-protagonist story, there are quite a few of them. They're difficult to write. Things like Stand By Me or The Breakfast Club, or there's quite a few different multi-protagonist stories. What I'm talking about is slightly different because there is only one story, the A story. And the B story and C story may seem like separate story threads, but they all kind of come in and they push the A story forward, right? So it's slightly different. But, in Love Actually, a lot of the different side stories were quite simple, right? So I mentioned the two porn actors that fall innocently in love with each other. Their goal is to get to the first date. That's it. Very, very simple, very straightforward. But no less complex than any other human relationship or interaction, right? But because they have that simple goal, every time we pop back into their story, we're like, oh, have they gone on their date yet? Right? And you're leaning forward. And then, of course, in wonderful, is it Richard Linklater? No, it's not Richard Linklater. Forget the director's name. But what he did was he juxtaposed it by making them porn actors, right? So, or porn doubles anyway. And they've already crossed the boundary where they're almost having sex with each other, but then they're trying to get to the first date. So that sort of dichotomy is really kind of funny and interesting, right? So, so there's that, right? This idea of a C story, making sure the objective is fairly straightforward, right? Okay, so in episode 1, really old idea. Actually, we'll go with this because I don't have an idea yet, right? So we've got the first episode, right, where we've got the demon transfer as the cold open, right? Then we've got the introduction of the son, Mark. What is the first mission of the story, right? That's the interesting thing to figure out. What is the first story? And it's got to be a story. Here's the thing. The story's got to have the SEAL team in there. And there's got to be military firepower because I want to set the rules up. I want to say, this is what you're getting, right? It's also the pilot. You want to throw everything at your audience to really sort of engage them, right? And then you can slow the pace down once you start opening up different episodes. But you really want to grab them in the first episode, right? So what is that? Well, initially, well, let me read through this. I know that I had this sort of corridor set up. So a mysterious corridor appears along a bike path and is somehow connected to Mark's bedroom closet. The nexus will be Mark's council estate block of flats. Apparitions and demons have entered into this realm but are trapped in the corridor. A child gets lost in the corridor and it's up to SEAL Team Zero to extract the kid from the corridor. Mark has to trust an all-female squad. This is when I toyed with the idea of making an all-female squad. I might still do that, actually. His misogyny almost costs the kid his life. He ends up getting saved. So I want to introduce a lot of problems for our central kid. Now, the central kid is 16, 17. So at that time, your beliefs haven't solidified. You don't understand nuance as much. I think I can speak from experience there. And you have you make certain steadfast pronouncements. And so this kid believes, women Marines are not as tough as the guys, right? So that's like a steadfast belief. So I want to challenge that and bring that into the opening episode. I'm stuck here for a second because one of the things that I also want to do is to kind of talk about how the different apartments are connected together. Now, why I'm hesitant with this one is I came up with this premise before I realized I want to keep it all self-contained in the block of flats, right? So this corridor might actually be a hallway in the block of flats or something like that, right? Actually, just talking it out with you guys, I don't really like this. So I did like it originally, but I don't think this is a good way to start, right? I might actually save that one. Because we already got a kid being rescued. Already got that, right? In the teaser opening. We don't need that again, right? But I'm keeping this. Mark has to trust an all-female squad. His misogyny almost costs somebody their life, right? Something about that I like. I want to keep that. Almost costs someone their life, right? He ends up getting saved. Now, why am I bringing misogyny into it? It seems like I'm trying to write a political story. Why have I got misogyny in there, right? Why is that? Have I got a feminist agenda? What's going on here? What do you guys think? Well, okay, I'll tell you. Think about the character, right? The character has an estranged relationship with his mother. Hasn't seen his mother for 5-10 years. I got to lock it down. How long? Let's say 5 years, right? The mother is left for reasons that I still have to come up with. And so wouldn't it be natural that he becomes misogynistic slightly? I think that's justified for the character, right? So not only is he being forced in the pilot episode to come to terms with his misogyny, eventually he has to come to terms with his relationship with his mom, right? So that's interesting, right? And it's a way of weaving a little bit of our own world into the story dynamic, right? So that's why I have that there. Does that make sense? That this is the insane level that I think when I'm coming up with story ideas, guys. And I enjoy it. I enjoy... there are other... Well, actually, I used to be more like designing the little nitty-gritties of the world. What is the hierarchy? What are the rules of the world? But I've since, in the intervening years, spent more of that brain power thinking about the subtle psychological levers that are being pushed and pulled to make a character act a particular way. And I find that far more engaging and interesting than going, this is the empire, this is how they rose to power, this is the sector that they control, this is the rebel unit. You know, I used to love doing all that, but I found that there was no emotional kind of impact or connection when you design worlds and universes that way. But when you start thinking about human psyche, boy, you got a lot of juicy stuff to play with that people really react to, right? So this is why I go to this level when I'm thinking about stuff. Okay, so this is kind of where I left off. Oh, I've given myself some notes here as well. So the opening image, rules need to be set up in the pilot. They absolutely need to, right? This is the incident that tells the audience what the show will be like. That's important, right? So the very first pilot has to be like, this is if you're doing a vampire show, well, the vampire has to claim a victim, drink the blood, face off against a bunch of angry humans, and away you go. That's the story, right? And so people will be like, yep, that's what I signed up for. You gave it to me in the pilot, but you left me with enough that I'm interested in seeing what the other episodes have, right? So character flaw for this episode, maybe not necessarily carrying through the whole thing, but for this episode, perhaps it's misogyny. And what are the values that are being put forward to combat those character flaws by the hero? Because remember, what we like to see as an audience are the problems that they face the character and the solutions they come up with. So we need to find some really good solutions for this, right? The one quick sec. I'm just going to duck out for 2 seconds while I just go for a quick comfort break, and I'll finish off with the last few headings here. Okay, so let's take 5. I'm actually going to refill on coffee as well, and I'll be back in 2 minutes. Okay?
Cool.
All right, so I have remembered to do the be right back thing.
They're not going to hear our epic jokes anymore.
No, I
Wait, never mind. The audio is still on. You can tell jokes to entertain people. Hey, why did the bicycle fall over?
I don't know. Why did the bicycle fall over?
Because it was too tired.
Oh my god, yeah, we can. I just checked. My go, boys, my go. Alright, when Hal breaks, this is when we do our main thinking session.
I need another joke.
Good, I got it.
Go on then.
Will electric cars and diarrhea having coffee?
What?
Oh god. The idea I will be home. I will make it home.
Alrighty, I'm back. So,
Hello.
hey, how's it going, guys? You guys can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Go back and look at that Be Right Back screen later on and listen to the jokes we tell to entertain everyone.
Yeah.
We only got time for 2, but that's okay.
Yeah, entertain all the people. You're entertaining Gareth, by the way. I think he's the only one that ever tunes into this.
Hey, I won't say my joke was the best.
I'm gonna watch it back later. I was gonna mention, because I just realized this is a good opportunity to mention the difference between high concept and story, right? So when I go to episode 1, I say, look, what's the problem, right? What's this episode about? We have no story, and yet we figured all this stuff out, right? What we figured out is the high concept. Now, this is important because this is a danger that afflicts a lot of people. And I see like a lot of one-page pitches that are like this, right? Where you go, yeah, the high concept is great. What's the freaking story? Right? There's no story. Do you see what I mean? You can say, oh yeah, there is a story. The Bale's taken over her body and she's got to get the body back. It's like, yeah, that's the high concept premise. There isn't a story yet, right? And this is the problem. And this is why high concept is sometimes easier in a lot of ways to come up with than the actual story, right? It's like, okay, what happens next, right? So this is why I like this little setup of mine, because it helps me to think in categories. I don't think in categories when I'm writing. It's very, very fluid, and I'm just sort of going with the flow. But it's like I separate the two halves of my brain when I'm trying to figure out storytelling stuff, right? So this is taken from Aaron Sorkin. I'll talk about him quite a bit because I mean he's one of the premier screenwriters of our day. But he releases a lot of interviews and things on YouTube to discuss his process, and a lot of the stuff I innately agree with. There are other people I will talk about as well. Dan Brown, the novelist responsible for Da Vinci's Demons. I'll talk about Stephen King and his philosophy for writing, which is radically different from everything I'm teaching you now. And, there's quite a few other writers that we can talk about. Lajos Egri is a dramatist. We'll talk about him, but he deals more with theater. But so Aaron Sorkin says he worships at the altar of intention and obstacle. That's his famous quote. He says it all the time. I worship at the altar of intention and obstacle, right? That's the key ingredient for drama, right? So we need to figure out for this first episode, what is the intention and what is the obstacle, right? So the intention, let's just say the intention is for to get Raven back into her body, right? The obstacle could be Bale has it, right? But it could be something deeper than it. It could be something else, right? The obstacle could be her kid doesn't want to go with her. I shouldn't say the kid. I should say Mark. Mark doesn't want to go with her, right? Doesn't want to go with his mom. Maybe that's an obstacle, right? So then we have a situation where Raven has to convince Mark to go with her. He still blames her. So I'll go back and forth, thinking about these intentions. So it's almost kind of like I'll think in terms of one character and go, this is what they want. And then I'll go, oh yeah? That's stopping you, right? And the more obstacles you put in front of your character, the greater a sense of drama you're creating, right? So what is the central conflict of that episode, right? Let's say the mother, Mark and his mother are constantly arguing. That's cool. I like that, right? Because they have a mission to do, and they can't stop bickering at each other, right? So we as an audience know you guys have to stop because you've got this important job you need to do, but they can't help themselves. And this also feeds into their history, and it also foreshadows when the mother ends up in the head, all kinds of stuff. So I think that's an important ingredient, right? So that might be the central conflict, right? Questions and promises. So I got to understand what I'm promising the audience in the story and what questions that I need to have answered. So how is Mark going to expel the demon in his head? That was from an earlier thing, so I'm going to take that out. Is Mark going to reconcile with his mother? Yes, that has to be a question. Promise. There has to be one hell of a big mother-son battle with Bale. There has to be, right? And Bale obviously has to win because we got to move on to the next episode. We also have to show the audience just how tough Bale is, right? And then I think about setups and payoffs, right? This was an interesting idea I came up with. So we're watching season 1, right? We see all of these different apparitions in people's apartments, maybe taking on the persona of their greatest weakness or their greatest fear or whatever. But what if at some point we learn that all the ghosts that inhabit this apartment tenement are ghosts of people that Mark's mother killed in combat or something like that, right? I say it out loud, but when I hear it out loud, I kind of don't like it. No, actually, this is good because I want to prove to you the value of when you write something down, you think about it in one context, but when you say it out loud, it feels a bit different, especially when you're telling people, right? This is the importance of pitching. A lot of people who work in the entertainment industry know how important pitching is. Because when you pitch, that's when you feel your story in a different light or a different context. And what worked on the page may not work when you say it out loud in front of people. Then there's also the table read. So if you write a script and you get a bunch of actors and they read it, it may again not work. Or you may discover things that you didn't think were there during the writing process. It's a very revelatory kind of process. Each stage, you learn something new about the story. Then when you go to storyboards, you're just like, wow, that scene read great with the actors, but how do I board this out? I can't storyboard it out to make sense shot-wise. So, each stage, it's just an evolutionary process, right? So yeah, ghosts are all people that Mark's mother killed. I don't know. I don't know about that. What do you think? What do you guys think about that?
It's a cool idea, but I don't think.
It's a cool idea, but I don't know, something like that. I don't know if how. What am I trying to say? Are you going to end up pushing the character to a point where the audience can't forgive her for...
Yeah. Yeah, but it might be interesting to toy with the audience emotions a little bit, because isn't a soldier's job to kill people? And so how do we justify our admiration for soldiers? That's interesting to me a little bit. Do you see what I mean? It's kind of interesting to wrestle with that idea. It's like, we celebrate soldiers, and rightly so. They're putting their lives on the line to protect us, but they kill people. So, yeah, I don't know. But I'll tell you the real reason why I don't like this is because we have the idea of minions being real people. Sort of replicates the nuance of this a little bit, I think, but in a better way. Do you know what I mean? It has the same nuance, but is a better idea. I think, right? But the reason why I wanted to connect the mother to the apartment is because there are reasons why this is all happening to one family. And I have to explain that, right? What, did lightning come out of the blue and strike the Mark and his mom and suddenly they're involved with all this mystical goings on? There's got to be some sort of sense of destiny, right? There's a reason why Bale has arrived right at that moment. You know, there could be some sense of prophecy for the events that are unfolding, which in another context would be cheesy. But I mean, we're dealing with biblical demons, so a sense of fate and prophecy might not be something that's not apropos to the whole idea, right? So it could fit. So, you know, maybe I wouldn't go so far as to say the mother was the seventh daughter of a seventh daughter kind of stupidness, but something, right? Something that connects Mark and Raven to Bale might be interesting. But it'd be difficult to write because if something is prophecy, it removes free will from the story. And when you remove free will from the story, drama is not immediate. Because drama exists when we don't know what's going to happen next. Right? But if somebody says, "Oh, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, that's going to happen," it's all just going to follow, the prophecy. Then it's like, "Oh yeah, okay, cool. Why bother watching it?" Because we watch because we want to know what happens next, right? And the idea that characters in a story are being manipulated by prophecy may take a little bit of the dramatic immediacy away, if that makes sense. Yeah. So that's why I don't know about that. I'm going to leave that there, right? But I still haven't found a successful setup and payoff for this episode, right? Setup. Yeah, at the end of this, Mother is inside Mark's head. That's the big thing. That's where I want to end up, right? So there we go. Next episode, real quickly. And after you spend an inordinate amount of time on the pilot, but after that, I generally try to come up with like one sentence concepts for each of the different episodes, so I can step back and see how the whole thing paces out, right? So the Nexus, start with a ghost hunt in progress. Introduce the big bad, which we've already done. Mark deals with rejection. That could be the emotional core of the episode. His mother comes to terms with her defensiveness. That was from an earlier idea. SAS team moves in. Oh, yeah. So eventually, the SAS team has to set up base inside the apartment, right? So this poses a lot of problems, right? Would military do that? Now, we get a little bit of leeway because this team, SEAL Team Zero, is outside the remit of regular SAS teams, right? So they're well, I say SEAL, I call them a SEAL team, and then SAS. We're dealing SAS, so the UK. So they're outside the remit of regular military. It's kind of like Mulder and Scully in the X-Files. They're an outside organization that has nothing to do with the FBI, right? Sort of like a deep state operative kind of thing, right? So nobody knows about them. So they don't have to follow all the military rules per se, but I do want a little bit of structure. So would the team actually move in? Would they disguise themselves as civilians? It would be convenient if they disguise themselves as civilians because we would save on budget and cost If we didn't have to have all the military kit around all the time, they could just wear regular clothing, right? So it actually helps production a little bit. But it doesn't feel militaristic to have them dress as civvies, right? You want every excuse possible to put them in their gear, I think. I don't know, right? And then there should be an opportunity to introduce a mentor character. I like having a mentor character. I know it's following the Joseph Campbell formula, but I like the mentor character. I think it's nice to have, as a juxtaposition or a counterpoint to everybody acting chaotically, to have a character who's completely in control of everything. So who that is, I don't know. I put mom's old teacher with a question mark. That's cheesy, but somebody. I know that something needs to be here. And it's interesting. I've got 4 levels of hell. So I started thinking about the hierarchy. I like the 5 elders better, right? So refer to story world plan, right? So the theme stated, right? So by this time you should state the theme. Not that we haven't figured out yet. We might not figure out the theme until the very end of this whole process, right? So I've just put down notes: hate and love, discuss. Is it about a mother's love? Is it about reconciliation? What is the theme, right? We don't know yet. We're dancing around an idea of it, right? And the fact that we've got a mother and a son estranged and they have to find that love again. So we were dancing around the theme a bit. And what are the primal ideas that we're playing with? What are the things that get to people's emotional core, right? So here, how powerful is unrequited love, right? So how much does Mark not want to forgive his mother, right? Because it'd be interesting to show that Mark actually feels like he wants to forgive her, but he's keeping himself from it. Why? Now that might be an interesting question to answer, right? Like if we see that in the course of a couple of episodes that they're coming closer together, but then suddenly he pulls away, right? It's like he's reminding himself, wait, I'm mad at you, right? And people tend to do that, don't they? They try to hold on to their anger, right? So he really wants to hold on to his anger. I see that for his character, right? So that might be an interesting sort of primal thing to play with emotionally, right? So the 3rd episode is called Trial. Here I thought might be a good opportunity to show the mother on a solo mission. So check this out. We've got the intro, we got the problem set up. We got the 2nd episode where they go on a mission and you really see that the mother and son don't get along, right? So wouldn't by the 3rd episode be an interesting point to say, hey, let's get to know the mother a little bit more, right? So let's do a solo mission, right? Counterpoint with Mark circumventing some rite of passage. Mark confronts his mother, puts her on trial. Not really on trial, but is questioning her and sort of this is the episode where all of Mark's pent-up accusations come out, right? So they've done 2 missions together. So now he's just like, wait, I have a few things I want to say to you before we go any further, right? It'd be that kind of moment, right? So, so the mother confronts, Mark confronts his mom, blames her for everything. Then she reveals this. She's losing cohesion, right? So that's the perfect time to reveal that. It's like you got Mark going, you did this, you left, and you did this, and you know what? I hate you. And then she goes, I'm dying. Right? Boom. Kind of cool?
Kind of cool.
Yeah? So I think that the 3rd episode might be the time to bring that up. But I don't know. We're planning it out, right? We're planning it out. Right? And I need to also talk about what else is going on in the world. So we've talked about the demon world. Well, what is going on in the rest of the world? We need to know by episode 3. Right? Do people know about this? Do people not know? Are they on the verge of discovering it? Well, what kind of village is the village that they're living in? Right? Is it weird to begin with? Is it ordinary? We want to see what the rest of this, the canvas is in terms of this world, right? Now, a lot of people put that what's going on in the world in the first episode, right? They do a day in the life. That's what they call it. So you guys will recognize a day in the life, right? Because the main character will get up, put on a cup of coffee, maybe smash an alarm clock, get ready for work, right? That kind of stuff. You know, out there waving a taxi. The taxi drives over a puddle. They get soaked. You're like, oh, poor guy. Now we know a little bit more about his character, right? I don't like that. I've never liked day in the life, right? I like jumping right into the story and then saving the revelation of the ordinary world a little bit later. So that's my own personal taste, right? So again, that would be the third. And then the fourth episode, I start to lose the thread of where the whole season is going. And I'm coming up with these isolated stories. So roughly something called the Dollhouse. It's a statement on family life. The tenants start acting weird, possessed. A young girl accompanied by a demon boy play house in a ghostly dollhouse. And what they're doing is they're controlling people in the apartment. Something like that. I don't know. So this is the point where... This is the point where I'm going a bit Twilight Zone, right? But there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, the whole reason I wanted to set this up in the apartment, and each apartment has a different story, is so that there's freedom for us to come up with these different Twilight Zone-like stories, right? So that's a wonderful opportunity there. And then you can see I sort of stopped there. I'm beating out a few of the different things. Mark can't contain 2 spirits. It's killing him, but she can't leave or the demon will go full possession. Oh, yeah, okay. That was from an earlier idea. So anyway, perhaps we can sort of start there. So the idea is that, and again, you guys have a link to this master spreadsheet, right? So you can come in here. If you feel uncomfortable writing in these actual cells, you can give yourself another column over here and just start jotting a few ideas down, right? How I type in an Excel spreadsheet, by the way, is when you want to do a carriage return, it's Alt-Enter, and then that gets you down to the next line, right? But what I'd like you guys to do is go through, and again, I asked you last time to come up with little scenarios and little premises. I haven't asked you to talk those through yet because I thought it'd be nicer to explain to you how I'm thinking here and have you jot your ideas down in here, right? So have a look at the overall season arc and see where we want to go. I put in quite a few different things. Bale escapes into the body of Mark's father. That's gone. Bale... I think we end with something else, not that. But we can talk about these different sort of beats that happen, right? And then eventually, I want you to grab one of these, like, oh, the dollhouse. I want to write that. And then we'll start talking about how we would plan that out, right? So as I said earlier, I'm going to pop back over to the synopsis and we'll talk about the core wound, right? So this is the hardest thing that I generally tend to have to figure out is a character's core wound. And it's really, really important because it's what drives them forward, right? So a core wound or Achilles heel is the direct opposite of the conscious desire, right? So to give you an idea, maybe Mark's conscious desire is to hate his mom. But his core wound is, despite everything, he still loves her. Well, it's weird to call that the core wound, but I'm trying to give you an idea anyway. So if we take a look at what I've jotted down here for notes under under Mark's character, right? His mother always demanded perfection. So he lives his life as messy as he can make it to prove her wrong, right? Perhaps he's a consummate liar, lies about everything. He's trying to reinvent himself because he doesn't like what his mom was trying to turn him into, right? Feels like he lacked a loving mother. Maybe that he's carrying that with him. His greatest fear of losing his mom too. So I need to figure out where the father is at this point, right? So that's sort of, I introduced the father as an alcoholic, but I'm not entirely sure what to do with the father, right? Because the father is a very important ingredient to their relationship, their dynamic, right? So did the father die? Does he blame the mother for the father dying? You know, maybe she didn't abandon him. Maybe he left. And the evil that's occurring within him is he's developing misogyny. Why? Because he feels abandoned and ignored by his mother. This carries through with all the women in his life. Maybe that's the big thing that he's got to get over. I don't know. So I'm just toying with these ideas, right? This is followed closely by the lie. We all have a lie we tell ourselves, right? So this is something I like to think about for the character. What is the lie that Mark is telling himself to help him sleep at night, right? Maybe it's this. I don't really need a mother. Dad and I are doing just fine, right? See how that works? So now we're starting to carve out a very interesting, I guess, psychological dilemma for the character, right? So for me, character design goes beyond how old is he, what does he wear, how, you know, what color hair is he, what school does he go to, blah, 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 blah. That doesn't help me craft a story, right? That doesn't give me ideas for these dramatic moments. This does, though. This absolutely does, right? So I can see when they argue and things like that. A powerful example of this that I learned before I learned how to define all this, I was watching an episode, I think it was a pilot episode of Evangelion. Have you guys seen that cartoon? No. Okay. So in the opening scene, we've got these giant monsters called angels, and they're destroying, you know, whatever Japanese city they're destroying, right? And so the humans have this EVA program, which are these gigantic robots, very much like Pacific Rim. Actually, Pacific Rim has been accused of stealing from Evangelion. But anyway, gigantic robots, they need to be piloted by kids. And only these kids can connect with these robots, right? So the leader of the organization calls his son. And the son is the main character, a guy named Shinji. And the monsters are destroying the city. People are dying, and they're getting closer and closer to the headquarters. The father has a son in front of him and says, you need to get in the armor because only you can pilot it and only you can stop them, right? There's a moment of silence. And then the kid looks up and goes, where were you? Where were you when I needed you? Monsters destroying the front gates are being ripped open. And the father's going, I need you in that armor. And the son goes, answer the question. Where were you when I needed you? Holy cow. Heart-pounding drama, right? It's like, find the worst possible moment in an action sequence to come to terms with your emotional issues, right? But it's interesting and it's engaging. And because that was in the first episode, it really kind of pulled me in, right? And I wanted to see not only if Shinji would save the city, but if there was some kind of reconciliation between the father and son. So this is why I spend an inordinate amount of time trying to understand the emotional space that my characters live in, because that will create for moments like that are really interesting and powerful and engaging, right? It's cool. Any thoughts or comments on that?
I don't think so.
Okay, cool. Do you guys have any ideas that you feel might be helpful in fleshing this whole thing out? No, that's okay. It's like creativity on the spot. Come up with something cool now, right now. I don't expect that. I don't expect that straight away. But again, I'd like. In fact, you know what? Let's formalize it a little bit. You know, I'll come through here and give you guys each sort of a column, I suppose, right? And you guys can work your way down, right? So I mean, it's only the three of us, right? So David and then Ben. No, on second thought, no. Just David and Ben.
Whoa, what are you doing? I promise I won't ask you a bit. I promise.
I'm gonna lock you out. Yeah, so all you got to do is go through this and just add your thoughts, right? And you're welcome to add them in the rest of the spreadsheet. I don't mind, right? So it's all good. Let me save off this copy of it. David and Bibbin is there. And then that should take us to the end of our session, right? We're at 12. Yeah, 11:53. Yeah. So now, I mean, I'm really super happy because we've made quite a bit of progress on this so far. But now we're diving into the nitty-gritty of trying to put this all together, right? Now, the thing to keep in mind about the episodes up to episode 10, right? Each episode, even though it's a self-contained story, and I'm doing this the opposite of most storytelling sessions or, story tutorials, right? But each episode fits into the Act 1 climax, the Act 1, the Act 2 midpoint, climax, Act 3, right? So each episode in that one sentence has to build towards something, right? So like, to give you an example, you could say something like, episode 6, Bale gets closer to his goal, right? Do you see how that works? So that there's like this huge underlying push to watch every single episode. And then we'll go in and we'll apply that 3-act structure to each episode as well. It's what I call the fractal story arc, which I later discovered wasn't really invented by me, bummer, but was created by a screenwriter named Frank Daniels, who would say that every 15-minute chunk was a self-contained story in a much larger story. So it's a similar kind of concept, but I firmly believe it. Because if you think that way, every 15 minutes or so, you're giving the audience something where they want more, and they'll lean forward in their seats, right? Novelists do it all the time. They'll try to, with each chapter, give something in the chapter that makes you want to keep turning pages, right? Stephen King goes over the top with it. Like, every 5 pages or so, there's something that's just like, holy crap, and you've got to find out what else is going on. He's accused of being not more than just Pulp Fiction level because his novels are so intense. But I don't listen to that. I think Stephen King's quite accomplished as an author. So it's that kind of a thing. I'm kind of walking you guys through some of the building blocks that I use. And by proxy, I'm hoping that you guys learn this stuff so you can adapt it for your own work. As well as the spreadsheet, right? You can grab a copy of it and use it for your own story development. I find it helpful. You guys might try it and go, wow, this is sort of an awkward thing for me, designing stories in a spreadsheet. So, it's totally up to you. But I find it helps me organize my thoughts a little bit before I dive in. So when I'm writing, I actually have this open on a second monitor, and I've got Writer Duet open on my main monitor, and I'm writing away, and every now and then glancing at it. This is like my GPS, right? I don't entirely follow it, but every now and then I glance at it to make sure I'm going in the right direction, right?
As a sufficient scriptwriter, I have to say it's notes for me. It's iPhone notes for me, guys. It's iPhone.
iPhone notes. Yeah, there's that too. And your writing shows.
I've got some in the BBC. They're gonna like it. They're gonna prove it. It's a rip-off of too many films, so they're gonna like it.
Right. Okay. Well,
maybe I'll like it. Ben, I did not create it for you yet. I did not create that for you.
Okay, cool. I guess we'll call it there. And then we'll pick up. So next class, I'm going to try to do my mapping of episode 1 because there's a bunch of stuff I have to rewrite now that I've rethought the story. But I also want to start hitting you guys with a few different lectures where we start taking a look at human behavioral psychology, but then we also talk about moral law and legal jurisdiction type stuff. And the reason why I want to bring that in is to show you guys one of the hardest things to think about in terms of story design and development is theme. What is theme, right? And if theme cuts to the core of understanding human behavior or some kind of moral dilemma, then you're on the money. So how do you get there? How do you create an intelligent, sophisticated theme? Well, you take a look at human behavioral psychology to a certain degree, and then you take a look at moral law and where that came from. And you'll find some very, very interesting things to work out. So just like that train lecture and that dilemma of, do you kill the one worker on the train track or the 5, right? It's these types of things these types of mental gymnastics that make it very, very interesting for our audience as they're watching our stories unfold. And then what our job to do is to, I guess what our job is really is kind of like edutainment creators, right? We're dealing with these sophisticated, elevated themes in an educational context, but we're putting a nice candy coating around it and saying, this is just escapist fiction, right? And it's just a story about Marines battling ghosts. But really, that nugget that we've hidden in there are these questions of morality, right? So we'll take a look at that a little bit. It's a bit of an experiment for me, guys, because I've never gone into to talk about psychology or moral law, and I want to find a way that it fits. But if it doesn't, we'll go back to just pure storytelling stuff. I find it hugely beneficial because it gives me ideas of things like bringing misogyny in, because misogyny might be connected to the estrangement that my main character has with a mother. And little things like that. It adds a layer of complexity to your stories that I find interesting myself as an audience member, right? So there you go. 11:59, bang on the money. We'll leave it there. And I will see you guys next week.
Cool.
Yeah, so please feel free. Jot some ideas down in there, right? Just don't delete any of my stuff. That's the only thing I ask.
Yeah, it's okay though, yeah.
I've got to make sure that's on me now.
Uh-oh, I better save a backup copy now.
If I don't like anything on there, I might change it to my preference. Okay, is that
Fail,
cool?
fail straight away.
Revoke the editing privileges immediately. Hey, no. What? Hey, I'll refer back to my Apple Notes, yeah?
Apple Notes.
I'll cringe at that.
Fair enough. Okay, I'll talk to you guys later.